Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 16, and verse 11. Durasado Dervishaha Asanopi Viduravat Naiva Bhavitum Shako Venaranyutito Nalaha Durasado Dervishaha Asanopi Viduravat Naiva Bhavatum Shako Venaranyutito Nalaha Darasado Dervishaha Asanopi Viduravat Naiva Bhavatum Shako Venaranyutito Nalaha. Synonyms: Durasada, unapproachable. Durvishaha, unbearable. Asanaha, being approached. Api, although. Viduravat, as if far away. Na, never. Eva, certainly. Abhibhavatum, to be overcome. Shakya, able. Vena, King Vena. Arani, the wood that produces fire. Utitaha, being born of. Anala, analaha, fire. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti-vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: King Prithu was born of the dead body of King Vena, as fire is produced from Adani wood. Thus King Prithu will always remain just like fire, and his enemies will not be able to approach him. Indeed, he will be unbearable to his enemies, for although staying very near him, they will never be able to approach him, but will have to remain as if far away. No one will be able to overcome the strength of King Prithu. Purport: Adani wood is a kind of fuel used to ignite fire by friction. At the time of performing sacrifices, one can ignite a fire from Adani wood. Although born of his dead father, King Prithu would still remain just like fire. Just as fire is not easily approached, King Prithu would be unapproachable by his enemies, even though they would appear to be very near him. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Agyana Timarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Good morning to all. We sincerely ask for the blessings of the assembled Vaishnavis and Vaishnavs to be able to speak properly on our Gaudiya Vaishnav Siddhanta. And today we'll try to enter into the ocean of glories of Srila Jiva Gosvami, whose disappearance day is today. And it's also the disappearance day of Sri Jagadish Pandit. So to begin, it's a very interesting verse and purport today, because King Prithu was born from King Vena, who was such a cruel person. We've talked about King Vena many times in this morning class and what he would do. And yet King Prithu was born from King Vena just as fire is produced from Arni wood. So Arni wood is a type of wood that they would use for sacrifices, where the Brahmins, they would actually chant mantras that would basically self-ignite the wood by drawing out the fire that's within the wood. So this is using a very mystical, metaphysical science of understanding how there's different elements within material objects and drawing those material elements out. So the Brahmins, they would actually be so pure that they could draw out the fire with mantras. What to speak of churn a body and create King Vena, King Prithu. So here it's talking about how, although born of his dead father, King Prithu would still remain just like fire. And it's interesting how it's talking about how just as fire is not easily approached, King Prithu would be unapproachable by his enemies. Now, King Vena was such a cruel, hard-hearted person that nobody wanted to approach him because he was such a cruel person. But King Prithu, he's not cruel like his father. He's Shaktivesh avatar. He's an empowered personality that's gifted the opulence of monarchy, of this power of ruling by the Lord. And so he's not going to be easily approachable by his enemies, but we'll see how loved he is by the residents of the earth, his devotees. And so it's that difference between demanding respect and commanding respect, right? We see people in this world, they want power and they want respect, and so they demand it. And so people might fear them, right? And some people like that. They like to be feared. People are under their control and, everybody's afraid of them. But commanding respect is that King Prithu, he is such a qualified king, and he sees to the needs of everyone. We'll see how he even is able to milk Mother Earth and free the people of drought and famine. And so he's such a caring person that he commands respect. So he's feared by his enemies, but he's loved by his people. And I was thinking in connection of this verse and topic on how it's interesting sometimes in our lives that the great teachers of bhakti, the acharyas, right, they can sometimes feel like they're not easily approachable. But on these great appearance and disappearance days of Vaishnava acharyas, this is when they're most easily approachable, even though they're like fire. And how are they like fire? It's because they're going to purify us, just like fire purifies everything. So by touching upon the glories of the great Vaishnava acharyas, then we're able to purify ourselves. We're able to enter into the fire of devotional service, which cleanses everything. So today is the disappearance day of Sri Jagadish Pandit, who was a very intimate associate of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a very young child, known as Nimai Pandit, one day it was Ekadasi, where one fasts from grains and beans and tries to perform extra devotional service. And on this day, Nimai, little child, went to his mother and father and said, I want to eat the food that Jagadish Pandit and Hiranya Pandit have offered to Lord Vishnu. They're fasting from grains and beans, but they've prepared some dishes that are non-Ekadasi, they're non-Anukalpa. They have grains in them. They've prepared some grain dishes for Lord Vishnu, and I want to eat those dishes. Now, Jagadish Pandit lived some distance away. How did this child know? And so, begging, Sachi Devi took Nimai to the home of Jagadish Pandit, and lo and behold, there were some dishes there that they had offered to Lord Vishnu. Now, Nimai Pandit, being young age, Shastra says that children under the age of 8 do not have to follow Ekadasi Vrata. They don't have to follow that Ekadasi Vrata vow. So he was able to partake of that prasadam that they offered to Lord Vishnu. And Sri Jagadish Pandit was in great awe. And so in the pastimes Navadvip, Jagadish Pandit was there to see the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And today is also the disappearance day of Srila Jiva Gosvami, one of our great acharyas, Goswamis. And these disappearance days, Vrindavan Das Thakur says they're not less important than even Janmashtami. And we all follow a big celebration for Krishna's birth, Janmashtami celebration. But these appearance and disappearance days are not less important, according to Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur, because these great personalities, Jagadish Pandit, Srila Jiva Goswami, they're eternal associates of the Lord. And Srila Narottam Das Thakur says in one of his songs that one who understands that the eternal associates of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda are also eternal residents of Navadvip, and they're also eternal residents and associates of Radha and Krishna, they're able to swim in the waves of Radha Krishna Prem. They're automatically achieving liberation by understanding that these personalities are also eternally liberated. So Srila Jiva Goswami, most say that he was born around 1513 and he lived until 1598. And he was the son of Vallabha, who was the brother of Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatan Goswami. So Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Sanatan Goswami, they are the most intimate disciples of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And through their literature and lives, our Gaudiya Vaishnav Sampradaya, our tradition, lineage, culture comes from them. Our Siddhanta philosophical conclusions come from them. Everything that we're doing in Krishna consciousness comes from Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatan Goswami. And so Srila Jiva Goswami is their nephew. Vallabha, he also took initiation with Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami. So they were known, their Muslim names were Dabir Khas and Sakar Malika. And so Vallabha was known as Vallabha Malika. And they were all employed in the government of the Nawab Hussain Shah. And when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to Ramkeli, where Rupa and Sanatan, or Dabir Khas and Sakar Malika were living, Vallabha was also living there. And so Srila Jiva Goswami was born in Ramakeli. And when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tried to go to Vrindavan for his first time, he stopped at Ramakeli and he initiated Dabir Khas as Srila Rupa Goswami, and he initiated Sakar Malika as Srila Sanatan Goswami. And then he gave the name Anupam to Vallabha Malika. Now, Anupam is a very beautiful name. In Sanskrit poetics, upama means simile, where we compare one thing to another. So oftentimes in Sanskrit poetics, you have this eyes just like lotus petals, right? And when we hear certain prayers of Radha and Krishna, or even Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, right? Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is compared to a lion. So all these different similes are used to try to compare one thing to, a face just like the moon. But Anupam means no comparison. So in the beginning stages of devotional service, we're offering prayers and we're trying to compare the Lord and the Lord's body to different material objects that are the most beautiful. But then Anupam comes when you realize you can't compare anything to Krishna. Right? Krishna's eyes, how can they actually be compared to a lotus? They're even more beautiful than the lotus. So Anupam means that which has no comparison. And we can also understand how Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave Vallabha this name Anupam, because he's a father like no other. He has a son like Srila Jiva Goswami. And so he's a father that can't be compared to anyone. What to speak of King Vena and King Prithu, right? So Anupam, he raised his, yes, Tara, Anupam, yeah. So Anupam took care of his little baby and even brought his child, right? He's born in 1513. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas in 1514 and took his little baby to see the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Srila Jiva Goswami grew up to be one of the greatest scholars of the world, right? When we look at Srila Vyasadeva, who compiled the Vedic scriptures, especially Mahabharata. Mahabharata is one of the longest books written in history, right? It's 100,000 shlokas, 100,000 verses. Srila Jiva Goswami wrote 400,000 shlokas in his lifetime. Think about that. Mahabharata, which is, when it's translated in English, is volumes and volumes of books. 100,000 verses. Srila Jiva Goswami wrote 400,000 shlokas. And it's not like Facebook posts or Instagram posts where it's just rambling and, misspelled quotations. No, this is very, very dynamic writing, revealing the entire theology of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We'll get into that in a little bit, but one of his most famous works is Harinamrita Vyakarana, where he wrote a work to help people learn Sanskrit by remembering Krishna. He says trying to learn Sanskrit is like going through the desert. It can be a very arduous task. And so he wrote this Harinamrita Vikarana, which when you take the different vowels, consonants, right? You have ah and ah. You have a short A and a long A. So the short A he calls, or the short vowels, and he calls Vamana, right? Because Vamana is a short Brahmin. But then when it's a long A, it becomes Trivikram, right? Trivikram. Vamandev, he steps over the universe. And so in such a way, he's able to help people learn Sanskrit when there's conjunctions and compound words. It's called satsang, getting the devotees together. So in a very beautiful way, he's written a work that also Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was teaching Sanskrit, he showed how every verbal root, how every word of Sanskrit can connect to Krishna. So Srila Jiva Goswami wrote a very powerful work, and then he wrote many beautiful commentaries. One of the most famous is Durgama Sangamani, which is the commentary for Srila Rupa Goswami's Nectar of Devotion, or Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Durgama Sangamani means resolving the difficult. So resolving the difficult points that Srila Rupa Goswami might make. He wrote a commentary for Ujjvala Nilamani. And then his most famous of all works, the Sandarbhas, which is a 6-book series which fully explores the theology of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, systematically goes through all the different points from Srimad Bhagavatam. And so he, as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught, that the Vedic literatures can be understood through 3 phases: Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojan. So Sambandha, meaning what is our relationship to the world, to the energies of the Lord, to the Lord himself. This is called Sambandha, foundational understanding of spiritual life. Then Abhideya, which means, okay, once you understand all of the intricacies of your relationship, then what do you do about it? And then finally, Prayojan, which is ultimately love of God. So the first 4 books of the Sandarbhas, Tattva Sandarbha, Bhagavat Sandarbha, Paramatma Sandarbha, Krishna Sandarbha, is all Sambandha, going through the ontology of the Jiva, the ontology of Maya. Even the first book, Tattva Sandarbha, is an amazing work on epistemology. How do we receive information? How do we know what we know? And he basically writes Tattva Sandarbha to show that Srimad Bhagavatam is our greatest evidence of knowing this world and knowing who we are, knowing who Krishna is. And so then by establishing Srimad Bhagavatam as the topmost evidence of understanding reality, then all of the rest of the Sandarbhas are basically quotes and explanations of Srimad Bhagavatam. So the first 4 are all about Sambandha, and then Bhakti Sandarbha is understanding the Abhideya, or the process of devotional service, and then Priti Sandarbha, Prayojan, where it goes into Rasa Vichar, understanding the different mellows of love of Krishna through Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya, the relationships of friendship, parenthood, servitude and ultimately Madhurya Ras, the conjugal relationship the gopis have with Krishna. And so he's written volumes of books for us to dive into, or to speak of Gopal Champu, which explores the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam and reveals so many sweet pastimes of Krishna and how they're all connected. So Srila Prabhupada actually says he's the greatest scholar of our history. The amount of works and shlokas that he's written, so it's amazing, even by mundane standards. And so he was growing up in Ramkeli, and as a young boy, he lived like a prince because who his family were. They were some of the top government officers at that time. So he grew up living like a prince. But even though he was living like a prince, he had deities of Krishna Balaram, which is very significant in the realm of Goloka Vrindavan. Srila Jiva Gosvami is known as Vilas Manjari. He's one of the intimate maidservants of Srimati Radharani, and yet he's worshiping Krishna Balaram. And not to cause confusion or anything like that, but we see how the gopis in Venu Gita, they glorify Krishna and Balaram, and they're constantly wanting to see Krishna and Balaram. They say that this is ultimately the perfection of vision, is to just see Krishna and Balaram. Why would you want to see anything else? And so Srila Jiva Goswami, he himself, who looked like a golden doll made out of butter, he had such beautiful Mahapurusha features. He would just stare at Krishna and Balaram and worship them. And in love, he would just cry while looking at Krishna Balaram deities. And he grew up in his father's home until his father passed away. This is talked about in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Anupam Vallabha, he passes away. And when he passes away, Srila Jiva Goswami, he doesn't live like a prince anymore. He starts sleeping on the ground. He rejects all kinds of fancy clothes. He rejects any type of ornaments, and he completely renounces his prince life. And so one day he decides that he's just going to renounce where he even lives, and he travels to Navadvip. When he goes to the home birthplace of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he sees so many intimate associates of Lord Chaitanya, and he goes to the home of Srivas Thakur, one of the Panchatattva, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. So at Srivas Thakur's house, there was one most great personality who was happening to be staying there at that time, the Avadut Shiromani, the crown jewel of all Avaduts, Lord Nityananda Prabhu. And Lord Nityananda Prabhu, he took Srila Jiva Goswami on a tour of Navadvip Parikrama. And this is all very elaborately written down by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his book known as Navadvip Dhammyahatmya, where even Lord Nityananda Prabhu reveals so many deep tattvas, so many truths and understandings to Srila Jiva Goswami. And at the end, Lord Nityananda says, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given your family Vrindavan Dham. Vrindavan is given to your uncles, Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatana Goswami. You should go join them there. And so he goes to join them, but first he stops in Varanasi. Now, Varanasi, if Vrindavan is the home of devotees, Varanasi is the home of impersonalists. where all the Mayavadi sannyasis live and where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would go to deliver all of them, headed by Prakashananda Saraswati. But he stops in Varanasi because he has a dream that he should take shelter of Madhusudan Vachaspati. And actually, Srila Rupa Goswami, before Srila Rupa Goswami renounced, he had put away different amounts of money for the different family members. And so Srila Jiva Goswami actually used the money put away to enter into the school of Madhusudan Vachaspati, who was the disciple of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Who is Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya? He was one of the greatest logicians and philosophers of his time, even when he was living in Navadvip, but then he went to Jagannath Puri, and he was known as the kind of like court philosopher of Maharaj Prataparudra. And we know how Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to Jagannath Puri. When he went to Jagannath Puri, he saw Lord Jagannath and he fainted. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he brought guards and they looked at Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he knew that this is a great personality experiencing the greatest ecstasies of devotional service. And so he took Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to his home, saw that he's a young sannyasi. Oh, you're such a young sannyasi? Do you know the intricacies of Vedanta Sutra, which is the culmination of all the Vedas, of all the Upanishads? Vedanta. Veda means knowledge, Anta means the end. So Vedanta means the end of all knowledge. It's the culmination of all knowledge of the Vedas. Oh, you should sit down and hear from me for 7 days, the Vedanta Sutras. And so Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he's going through Vedanta Sutra, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's not showing any sign of really understanding or not understanding Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. When anybody gives class and you're in front of an audience, you speak something and you look around, and sometimes people have different expressions on their faces, and you're like, oh, did I say something wrong? Did I say something right? But Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he was going through Vedanta Sutra for 7 days. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he didn't look like he was understanding or not understanding. So at the end of 7 days, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya said, did you understand anything at all? Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he said, actually, I understand Vedanta Sutra very well, but you're using word jugglery to misconstrue the meaning of Vedanta Sutra. And then Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu goes forth to teach Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who was very much attached to the impersonal aspect of the Lord, Brahman, his heart then flourishes with bhakti, and he becomes a disciple of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So his disciple is Madhusudan Vachaspati. And so Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya taught him everything about Vedanta Sutra. Now, it actually reveals Krishna. Most devotees don't even know Vedanta Sutra very well, but in the end part, it even goes into Shakti Tattva, even the giving the understanding of Srimati Radharani. And so he reveals Vedanta Sutra to Madhusudan Vachaspati, who then teaches Srila Jiva Goswami. And Srila Jiva Goswami is the first of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, coming from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to write a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Because most followers of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they understand that Srimad Bhagavatam is the bona fide commentary of Vedanta Sutra. And so they didn't really care about writing a commentary because we have it as Srimad Bhagavatam. But not until later on with Baladev Vidyabhushana is a full commentary given of Vedanta Sutra called Govinda Bhashya. But before that, during the time of, the close time of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu leaving this world, Srila Jiva Goswami, in his Sandarbha, Paramatma Sandarbha, he comments on the first four sutras of Vedanta Sutra, and the first four sutras are called Chatu Shruti. So we have the Chatu Shloki, the four key verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. We have the four Chatu Shloki, the four main verses of Bhagavad Gita, right? Chapter 10, text 8 through 11. Bhagavatam, text, Canto 2, chapter 9, texts, I believe 33 to 37. I think, I could be off. It could be 30, anyway. But the first four sutras of Vedanta Sutra, they're the main verses. And so in Paramatma Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami, he comments on them. And so it's the first commentary of Vedanta Sutra that's in our Gaudiya line. And he learns all of this from Madhusudan Vachaspati. And then he goes to Vrindavan, where he takes shelter of Srila Rupa Goswami. Srila Rupa Goswami only had one Diksha disciple. He only had one disciple, and that was Srila Jiva Goswami. Now, Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatana Goswami, they had many Shiksha disciples, but Srila Jiva Goswami was the only initiated disciple of Srila Rupa Goswami. How amazing that is. And so in Srila Jiva Goswami's life, he teaches us so many lessons. Bhayam dvitiya abhiniveshitasyad, that in this world, one is full of bhayam, fear. Why? Because we're connecting with the material world, and instead of understanding that we're spirit soul, abhineveshita, we think that we're something also material. And we're being basically consumed by the dualities of this world. Ishad, what's the next line? Ishad apatesya viparyayo smriti. Viparyayo means misapprehension. Smriti means the memory. Right? When the memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. When intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material world. So we're enter into this material world because of this viparyaya, where we then have this mood that we're competitors with Krishna. Instead of understanding that we're servants of Krishna, we think that we're separate from Krishna, being in this world of hot and cold, happiness, distress, this world full of dualities. We become consumed by these dualities. And we're unable to understand that Krishna is everything. Vasudeva Sarvamiti. There is nothing but Krishna in actuality. But we have this viparyaya smriti, this misapprehension. And so tan mayayato, because of the external energy, mayayato, we're bewildered by this external energy. So Buddha abhajit tam, one should, who's wise, then worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How should one worship? Bhakti-yoga, Bhakti-yoga, Bhaktya ekaya. Ekaya means without false impersonal knowledge, jnana, and karma, without diving into fruitive activities, right? This is real bhakti, to understand, right? What does it mean to have faith? Shraddha shabdhe vishvaskahe sudridha nischaya. Sarva karma kritya. All activities, sarva karma, all activities, karma kritya haya. It's all activities in this world can be taken care of by performing bhakti. So we don't have to dive into impersonal knowledge or false knowledge, gyan, or even fruitive activities. Everything is done just by performing pure devotional service. But how are we supposed to perform pure devotional service? The last line of the verse, Guru Dev Atatma. Right? One should see the Guru as being the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Devata Atma, Guru Deva Tatma. Devata means the most worshipable personality is our Guru. Why? Because we're unable to see Krishna with these material senses. So what happens is that Gurudev is a manifestation of Krishna so that we can interact with him in this material world. Atma, we should see the Guru as our very life and soul. And so Srila Jiva Gosvami, he shows us this verse in real time, how Srila Jiva Goswami takes shelter of Srila Rupa Goswami. What does he do when it's hot out and Srila Rupa Goswami, he's writing his books, he's fanning him, he's doing menial service. What is he doing? He's massaging the body of Srila Rupa Goswami when he's tired. Right at that time, to write Sanskrit works, like Srila Rupa Goswami is writing, you had to get this long utensil pen that you would scrape into a palm leaf. And so Srila Jiva Goswami would prepare the palm leaves. He would prepare the writing utensils for Srila Rupa Goswami. And so he would do so many menial services, even though he's the greatest scholar of all time, still this Gurudev Tatma principle, how he saw his Gurudev as his life and soul, his everything, and was serving him to receive the blessings to enter deeper and deeper into the mellows of devotional service. So serving Srila Rupa Goswami in so many different ways. One day, while he was serving his spiritual master, fanning him, one great personality named Vallabhacharya. We recently read about him in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in our Sunday readings. He was a great Vaishnav scholar who was very friendly with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then he ultimately took initiation from Gadadhar Pandit. But one day he came to see Srila Rupa Goswami, and Srila Rupa Goswami is writing Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And Srila Rupa Goswami saw Vallabhacharya as a senior devotee, very learned senior devotee, and gave his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, what he had written, to Vallabhacharya, and said, "Oh, please take a look." And Vallabhacharya was reading and said, "Oh, there's some mistakes here. Would you like me to edit it for you? Would you like me to edit Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu?" Srila Rupa Goswami was, "Oh, please, would you? This would be most wonderful to help me in my devotional service." Srila Jiva Goswami was fanning, and he was a little inflamed inside. How is there any faults in my guru's writings? Especially Srila Rupa Goswami, right? We hear how one time Srila Rupa Goswami wrote a very beautiful poem about the hair of Srimati Radharani, specifically the braid. Srimati Radharani has a very beautiful braid that goes all the way down to her back. And one time Srila Rupa Goswami wrote a poem about how it looked just like a black sarpa, a snake. Srila Sanatana Goswami read this and he said, are you sure that a black snake, or this upama, simile, right? Srimati Radharani's hair is like a black snake. Is this correct? It feels off to compare the beautiful braid of Srimati Radharani to a black snake. And Srila Rupa Goswami, he said, "Prabhupada," he calls Srila Sanatana Goswami Prabhupada, "Prabhupada, please, if you feel it's wrong, please correct me." And Srila Sanatana Goswami said, "I'll think about it." And he went to go take his midday bath. And where he was bathing, on the far other part of the shore, he saw these young girls taking bath. And one girl, she came up out of the water and it looked like she had a black snake on her back. And he started yelling, "Hi, hi, there's a black snake on your back." And the girl, she turned around and she started laughing. And when she turned around, she had the most beautiful braid. And then the whole vision disappeared. Srila Sanatana Goswami, he understood anything that Srila Rupa Goswami writes is perfect and correct. He went back and told his brother Srila Rupa Goswami, anything that you write is absolutely perfect. In our pranam mantras in the beginning of class, Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Tatati Svapadantikam. Srila Narottam Das Thakur praised to Srila Rupa Goswami that we take shelter of Srila Rupa Goswami. Why? Because Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam, he understands Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Manobishtam. What is that? The innermost revelations of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's heart and mind are revealed through Srila Rupa Goswami. This is why he's also known as a Dvitiya Mahaprabhu. He's like a second Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's able to fully reveal the innermost heart of God to everyone in this world. So how can he write something incorrect? Srila Jiva Goswami felt that, no, I need to go see Vallabhacharya right away. So after he was done fanning, he went to Vallabhacharya. And in a very nice way, he corrected Vallabhacharya's understanding. He actually perfectly taught him how everything that Srila Rupa Goswami wrote in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu was absolutely correct. And Vallabhacharya was quite impressed. He went back to Srila Rupa Goswami and he gave back Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and said, "Oh, I don't need to edit it anymore. You have such a qualified disciple as Srila Jiva Goswami that his learning is just amazing. It's adbhuta, it's astonishing. So please, if you want anybody to edit it, you should have Srila Jiva Goswami edit it." Now, Srila Rupa Goswami, he wanted to teach the world how Vaishnav aparad, offending Vaishnavas, can be very subtle. That we should act in such a way that even if somebody mistakes that there might be some Vaishnav aparad, we should act in such a way that nobody will ever think that that could happen. How could that person offend another Vaishnav? And so Srila Rupa Goswami went to Srila Jiva Goswami and he said, "You talked to Vallabhacharya? You self-imposed yourself to teach this senior devotee? You've made yourself a little selfish. You've self-imposed. Nobody that's selfish or self-imposed can stay in Vrindavan. You should leave Vrindavan immediately." And so he was kicked out of Vrindavan by Srila Rupa. His guru was banishing him out of Vrindavan. He said, "Don't come back until you've learned to give up the self-imposition." And so Srila Jiva Goswami, he went to Nandagat, which is just outside of Vrindavan, but in another forest of the greater Vraj Mandala. Where did he live? He lived in a hole made by a crocodile. Crocodiles can make holes on the banks of rivers and lakes. And so he stayed in this crocodile hole, performing intense bhajan. He fasted and he prayed to his guru. Now, this is quite astonishing because this is the most perfect guru and the most perfect disciple. And so Srila Rupa Goswami, the perfect guru, is using his perfect disciple to show the entire world how one should behave and act. This is not for ordinary guru and ordinary disciples to act like this, so it can't be imitated. But the principle is there that Srila Rupa Goswami was showing that nobody who's selfish and thinking about oneself, and especially going to commit any type of Vaishnava aparad, no one can stay in Vrindavan, mentally or physically. And so Srila Jiva Goswami went and stayed in this crocodile hole. But he was still completely given the mercy, right? In Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, we see how Madhavendra Puri, who's the Param Guru of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, great Acharya, he has two disciples, Ishvara Puri and Ramachandra Puri. Ramachandra Puri creates offenses. And what happens because of these offenses? He's cut off from the mercy of Madhavendra Puri. The mercy is cut off, and he becomes an impersonalist. He becomes an aparadhi. He becomes such an offender that he tries to offend Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, God himself. Whereas Ishvara Puri becomes filled up with such bhakti and is so empowered that he becomes the guru of God. He becomes the intimate associate of Lord Chaitanya. So Srila Rupa Goswami, he didn't cut off the mercy from Srila Jiva Goswami. What happened in that crocodile hole? Srila Jiva Goswami composed Gopal Champu, which is a massive text going through all the leelas of Krishna in the 10th canto. Nigama kalpa toror galatam palam shukamukad amrita dravya samyutam bibita bhagavatam rasam alayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. That Srila Jiva Goswami is such a rasika bhavuka. He's full of bhav. He's full of intense emotional devotional service, that he's relishing Srimad Bhagavatam, which is dravya. It's the semi-solid liquid fruit of the Vedas, and he's constantly drinking the Srimad Bhagavatam. He's relishing it. And so he's relishing Srimad Bhagavatam. And so what happens in this crocodile hole? He's filled up with so much mercy of Srila Rupa Goswami that deep revelations from Srimad Bhagavatam are revealed to his heart. Now, some time passed, and Srila Sanatana Goswami, he was walking by Nandagat. And everybody knew Srila Sanatana Goswami in Vrindavan. Everybody would call him Baba, Baba. Like he was like an uncle or a father to everyone. And they said, "Oh, Baba, we thought you were so austere. We thought you were so renounced and austere, but there's a person that's even more renounced and austere than you." "Oh, really? Take me to him." They took Srila Sanatana Goswami to see his nephew, who was completely emaciated from fasting, but he was immersed in chanting the holy names, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and fully relishing the deepest revelations of Bhagavatam. So Srila Sanatana Goswami went back to see his younger brother, Rupa Goswami. Rupa Goswami was giving a discourse to some devotees. And Srila Sanatana Goswami, in the middle of the discourse, said, "My dear brother, I think you have forgotten the instructions of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Can you tell me the most important instructions of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu?" Rupa Goswami said, "Oh, dear Prabhupada, the first one is Name Ruchi. One should have deep attachment to the chanting of the holy name. One should taste the holy name, Ruchi. Jiva Doya. One should be merciful to the jivas." Srila Sanatana Goswami said, I think you've forgotten about Jiva Doya, being merciful to Jiva, the living entities. But in this way, he revealed, you're not being merciful to Jiva. And so Rupa Goswami, he went to Nandagat and he saw Srila Jiva Goswami, and he personally personally nursed his disciple back to health and served his disciple in so many ways. And Srila Jiva Goswami then wrote down the Gopal Champu, and he ended up editing Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, writing commentary, and he would then go on to edit some of Srila Rupa Goswami's most important works. And even he put together the Padyavali, different verses that Srila Rupa Goswami compiled. And after the disappearance of Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatan Goswami, Srila Jiva Goswami became the main acharya or successor of our sampradaya, our divine lineage in Vrindavan. And great personalities like Narottam Das Thakur, Shamananda Pandit, Srinivasacharya, they took shelter of Srila Jiva Goswami, who taught them all of the Goswami literatures, and taught them in so many ways. And he also organized the first book distribution party. He sent these three acharyas, Srinivasacharya, Narottam Das Thakur, Shamananda Pandit. He sent them on a trip to Bengal to then distribute the Goswami literatures, particularly Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, which would then bring together the entire Gaudiya Vaishnav philosophy, sampradaya. And in Bhakti Ratnakar, you can see some of Srila Jiva Goswami's letters that he wrote to different personalities, helping the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu grow. So there's always much more that can be said about these great acharyas. There's such a vast ocean, and we're trying to just catch a drop of their mercy. But it's 9:01, so we'll stop here. If there's any reflections, comments on what was said, we can take that now.
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. Obeisances. Thank you so much for a special day. I was just thinking that Jiva Goswami is such a great acharya for us and philosopher. And I was thinking about how when Janavama Acharya Rani came to enter Vrindavan for her pilgrimage, that all the sadhus came, to the border of Vrindavan to welcome her, including Jiva Goswami. And then also, of course, he spent time with her in Vrindavan, discussing the Leelas, etc., Siddhanta. And then when she was leaving, then everyone came, Jiva Goswami, they all came and were crying and ecstatic feelings of separation. And I'm trying to remember if it was Jiva Goswami who followed her all the way to Mathura. There was such a connection there, in their present Leela and then their eternal Leelas in service to Srimati Radharani, where the separation of the two was so intense for Jiva Goswami. So just was thinking of that. Thank you, Prabhu.
Any other questions, comments? All right. We can end here. Thank you for your kind attention. Please forgive me for any offenses or mistakes. If I said anything properly, it's all the mercy of Shishi Guru and Gauranga. Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Jagadish Pandit ki jai, Srila Jiva Goswami ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Elaboration on Jiva Goswami. Wonderful.